Do you feel intimidated reading a sewing pattern? Not know where to start? Today's video is just for you. By the end of this video, you won't feel intimidated. You will feel super confident that you can tackle any sewing pattern of your choosing and know how to read it. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Claire. So, when I first started sewing with sewing patterns, I was really confused. I didn't know what I was doing. It has all these symbols inside. It had very limited instructions. So this video is the next video in my series called Thanks, I Made That, where I give you a roadmap from choosing your very first sewing machine through to wearing your perfectly made handmade garment. I'm going to take you through both a commercial pattern and an indie one, and you'll see the differences. So let's get into it, shall we? So today I am showing you how to read a sewing pattern. So the first thing to know about sewing patterns is they come in lots of different companies, as you can see here. So there's lots of things that they've all got in common, and that's what we'll talk about today. It's more about the way they display their information that is different. So keep that in mind. So I want to put sewing patterns into two categories. So we've got commercial and we've got indie. So commercial patterns are New Look, Simplicity, Vogue. What have we got? Butterick, Burda, McCall's, New Look, a designer one, that is a Vogue pattern. And that's also a Vogue pattern, that's a vintage one. So commercial patterns are mass produced, they're produced by a huge company and they're distributed in vast numbers. If you're in America, you can buy their patterns super cheap, maybe 99 cents or £1.99. Here in the UK, they cost a bit more, they're about £8 or £9. Or you've got independents, which are designed by people who are just starting up on their own, like an individual, someone who just wants to design patterns, but they might not be a part of a big corporation like the commercial patterns. So here I've got some examples. So I've got Cashmerette. As we know, Jenny from Cashmerette, she started on her own and built her company up. We've got Gather, did much the same. I don't know a great deal about Gather, but I believe they did much the same. Tilly and the Buttons, that was designed by Tilly Walnes, who was on the Great British Sewing Bee. So you've also got sewing magazines that produce patterns as well, as an incentive to buy the magazine. And Cotton and Chalk is another independent, and I think they just give their patterns away in the sewing magazines. I've not really heard much of them otherwise. So today we're going to focus on these two patterns. I've got a McCall's pattern here, which is a commercial pattern, and I've got a pattern by Deer and Doe, which is an independent pattern. We will be focusing mainly on the actual commercial pattern because that's what most people are familiar with, but I will highlight any differences with this one. So I hope that helps you out. So let's get into it. So let's talk about the front of this pattern. So at the top, we've got the name, we've got the number. So if you saw this pattern online and wanted to go in the shop and buy it, you would look for this number. It's got the sizes that the pattern comes in. It's got the category of sizes, which we'll talk about a bit later. It's got a barcode there. It's got a photograph here of a woman wearing the dress, and it's got a B next to it, which denotes that it's version B of the pattern. It's also got 3 illustrations here, which is version A, C and D, because it's got an A, C and a D and next to it. At the bottom it gives you a bit of extra information about pattern cup sizes, and it's in French and English. And that is all that is on the front. Let's compare that to an indie pattern. So we've got their name at the top, Deer and Doe, which is similar to the McCall's at the top. It's got the actual name of the pattern. One main difference with indies and commercial is that indies tend to give their patterns a name, which is Maya or Freya or something like that, whereas Commercial patterns tend to have a number, and that makes it a lot more difficult to remember, but they have a lot more patterns in their catalogue than an independent designer does. So that is one thing that is very different. So we've got line drawings on the front but no photo, whereas there's photos and illustrations on the front but no actual line drawing. It tells you that it's from a collection of botany, so many independent designers will do collections similar to how a fashion designer would do a collection to display on the catwalk. They often will do collections which is like 3 or 4 different patterns in one go. This is part of the botany collection. So at the bottom here also tells us the sizes that it goes up to and the level. That's something this pattern doesn't tell you. Some commercial patterns will tell you whether it's an easy make or not. Like this one here says 6 so easy, so you know that that's a beginner pattern. If it's not telling you it's easy on here, you can assume that it's not. At least it's not a beginner level. But this is telling you it's a 4, level 4 out of 1 to 5. So more of an advanced pattern. So let's talk about the back of the commercial pattern. So at the top you've got the envelope, if you can see that there. And on that envelope there's a bit of information. First of all, we've got the price there. That's a retail price, but it's highly unlikely the price that they sell at. I think occasionally they'll sell them at that price, but not very often. We've got the pattern number and the item number. That's like a ID number for the shop, I believe. And then you've got the number in bold there and the company name. I'm not sure what that F stands for. But then we've got body measurements, and I will go into how to choose a size for your pattern in a separate video. But for now, just know that it's got all the sizes from size 6 to 22, and this will be US sizes because it's a US pattern. And then it's got the individual measurements in inches and in centimetres. But it has like the bust measurement, the waist measurement, the hip measurement, because you might be between sizes. So you might be a 14 in the bust and an 18 in the hips. That will help you choose which sizes you need to do. So it's got it in 2 sizes, so French and English. And so you would just choose your size. That will give you reference for when you're sewing it. And also, because down here in a minute we'll see that depending on your size, that will tell you how much fabric you need. Checking this out is very, very important before you purchase the pattern if you're looking at this in a shop. But obviously if you're looking at it online, you can look at this information on the product page. So now we come to the main body. On the left, we've got it in English, and on the right, we've got it in French. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I can ignore this side and just concentrate on the information on this side. So here it says we've got 2 sets of sizes. So you've got A5 and E5. So A5 is the smaller sizes from a 6 to a 14. And E5 is a 14 to a 22. So if we turn back, you'll see that says E5, and then it's got the larger sizes there. And E5 just relates to it being the larger of the 2 sets of sizes. Some of this information you won't need, but it's handy to know anyway. So then underneath it's got suggested fabric. So it's got crepe challis, crepe de jean, stable knits. So that gives you a really good clue about the sort of fabrics that you're going to go for. As a beginner, I would definitely say to follow their advice. They know what they're talking about. They're experts. If you stick with this, you will have a successful make. If you're more advanced and you know what you're doing, you'll know which other fabrics you can use, as this is only a little roundup. For contrast B, you'll need overlay shears as well. And for the lining, you can use any lining fabric. So here is how much fabric you're going to need. It doesn't actually label it as such. It just says sizes, which gives you no real information. But this bit is just how much fabric you are going to need. So how much fabric you're going to need is going to depend on about 3 different things. A, the size that you make, and it's got the sizes along there. B, the width of the fabric, which it's got the width down there, and also the version that you are making. So it's got A, B, C, D, and for your linings as well. So once you know your size and you've chosen your version and you've got an idea of the fabric you want to use if you haven't bought it, or you have got a fabric and you know the width, it's either going to be 45 inches or 60 inches, and you just find, so say let's say I was making a pattern in a size 20 and I was making a version B with 60-inch wide fabric. It would tell me I'd need 3¼ meters. Is that meters? Oh, as it says yards with notions, I'm going to assume this is in yards. So I need 3¼ yards, which is about 3 meters. And then underneath it's got notions. So you've got 2 yards of 1/2-inch ribbon. So it tells you exactly what you need to buy. So if you're buying this pattern in a shop, you can then buy everything you need for it at the same time. So underneath it's got finished garment measurements. Now a finished garment measurement is how big the actual finished dress or whatever it is. So that is how big the dress is, not how big you are or your size. Nothing to do with that, it's how big the garment is. That'll give you a fair idea about which size you want to choose. Something you'll come to learn in commercial patterns is they often make garments 3 times bigger than you need them, so it can be really frustrating. They have a stupid amount of ease in them. And so looking at the finished garment measurements, you'll be able to see, say for example, I am a 42 bust, I wish, but if I was, I'd choose a size 20 based on my body measurements. But then I go down to the finished measurement, and if we look at a size 20, for a D cup, which is what I am, that's 46½ inches. So that's 4½ inches of ease. So I have to determine, is that too much for me? That would be too much for a dress like this. I would want maybe 2 inches. So I would be looking to go to the size below, maybe a size 18, and sew that up as well. But I am going to get more into sizing in a separate video, so do subscribe if you want to know more about that. But that is just a general overview of what finished garment measurements are. It's got it based on your cup sizes, the hip line, and the back length from the base of your neck, so how long the dress is. So then at the bottom of the pattern here, we've got the line drawings. We've got line drawings for version A, B, C and D. So this is all the options. And this gives you a lot more information that has not been given to you in the envelope. So we can see the style lines. We can see how high or low the waist is. We can see if there's bust darts. We can see what sort of sleeve it is. We can see the flounce. We can see the waist ties. You can see the type of skirt it is. On each version you get a front view and a back view. So there you can see there's a centre back seam in the skirt. It just will give you a lot of information that is not available in the pattern. These line drawings can really inform your choices, and they should really inform your choices. Then at the bottom we've just got copyright information. So let's compare the back with the back of this pattern. So it's pretty much all the same information. It's just got the name on the envelope and that is it. And then we've got the line drawing. They're only offering 2 versions, and it's the front and the back of both versions. Like for this, I can see that the only real difference is that one's got sleeves and one hasn't. So really do check out those line drawings. And then again, it's got 2 languages. This side is French and this side is English. It tells you about the dress, just like the other pattern does. It tells you the sizes and the finished garment sizes. It tells you the fabrics you need, any notions you need, which are down here. It's got the fabric requirements as well, and then just copyright down the bottom. So it's the exact same information, but it is just presented in a more concise way. For example, you've got the sizes and the finished garment together. You have here as well, but I just feel that it's laid out much more succinctly here. But again, that's because there's more options on this one than this one. So yeah, no different whatsoever. So let's have a look inside the patterns. So in this commercial pattern, we've got 2 leaflets, and we've got our very neatly folded pattern pieces. So let's see what we've got in the independent. 2 leaflets and your pattern pieces. Main differences here, I would say it's on more expensive paper. So this paper looks a lot thicker. Although the instructions are very thin, they're not as thin, probably the same as that, but not as thin as that. And you can see here that this paper is similar to printer paper, whereas this is like tissue paper. Let's first have a look at our leaflets. On first glance, this looks really confusing and intimidating. I totally get you. But let's break down each section and make it a lot easier. So here we've got what you'd call like the front page. So it's just like McCall's, the number and the line drawings. Here is all the pattern pieces. You'll need to decide which pattern pieces you need, because for different versions you may have different pattern pieces, and also sometimes depending on the size you may have different pattern pieces. For example, the bodice front, it's got 3 versions there, but you're only going to need one depending which cup size you are. And then they've got A, B, C, D, or it's just C in that case after them, and that just depends on which version you're doing. If it's got no letter after it, you can assume that it's needed for all versions. This part here is just giving you some information about patterns in general. So here we've got pattern markings, and you'll see these markings here on the pattern, and it just explains what they are. So you've got the grain line, you've got the fold line, you've got a buttonhole marking, you've got a button marking, you've got notches and symbols, and you've got seam allowance. And that just explains what that is. So if you struggle on the actual pattern, you can refer to this. And then we've got a section called adjust if necessary. And this is just telling you how to shorten or lengthen your garment. So that's really handy. And then here it's got further instructions such as shrinking fabric, circle layout, the nap, double thickness with fold, double thickness without fold, single thickness. It's just talking about when you're cutting your fabric out, how to cut it out basically. Then the section underneath is the same in another language. So then underneath we've got cutting layouts. So it's got some symbols here. So if the pattern piece is white on the instructions, this is not on the actual pattern piece. If it's white, then it's the right side of the pattern. If it's got dots, it's the wrong side. If it's grey, it's the right side. And if it's white, it's the wrong side. So that is a little confusing. And then actually it's got the words translated for you there, which is quite helpful. Then we've got cup sizes underneath, and it tells you how to check for your cup size and how to choose your pattern piece. The next bit is how to lay your pattern pieces on your fabric ready for cutting out. Now when you're a beginner, it's really good to follow this, but it's not the most effective way of using your fabric because it will create a bit of waste. So as you get more experience with sewing, you will learn to disregard that and cut it out how you want to cut it out. But that is given the options for 45" and 60 inches. And then the same for version B. So if we turn over, it continues with a version B. Down there you've got the lining layouts for version A and B, except that it's kind of, the ink's rubbed out a little bit, so you can't see it really. Then we've got version C and D, which is just the same. Lining for C and D. Then we've got some sewing information here, and it's got the right side of the fabric, the wrong side of the fabric, interfacing, right side of the lining and wrong side of the lining. So the main points are the interfacing will have dots, lining will have these little lines on it. Then it tells you your seam allowances. So the pattern has incorporated seam allowances of 5/8. So you should follow that. If you don't follow the right seam allowances, you will create a dress that is in the wrong size. Sometimes with a pattern it'll say the seam allowance is 5/8, but there'll be certain points in the pattern where they use a different seam allowance, such as on the neckline they might use 3/8, but the pattern will tell you at that point in the instructions if the seam allowance has changed, so just be aware of that. And then it's got images that are denoting how to trim enclosed seams into layers, trim corners. This table is shaking so bad, look. Notch outer curves, clip inner curves. So that's just a little bit of instruction there to tell you what to do. Pin and fit. It's telling you to pin or baste your seams together, right sides together, and try the garment on and see if it fits you well before you sew it up properly. And then it's telling you to press seam allowances flat, and then it's just instructions, basic instructions on how to sew. And then underneath we've got a glossary. So when it tells you to ease stitch, edge stitch, gather, narrow hem, reinforce, slip stitch, stay stitch, top stitch and understitch, it tells you what those things actually mean, which is really helpful as a beginner. And now we get on to the sewing directions, or the sewing instructions I should say. So you've got dress A, B, C and D. So the first bit, it will tell you if you need to sew a certain bit. It's for all the versions, but depending on which version you are doing, you may have to miss certain parts out. Overlay B, if you was doing version A, you wouldn't need to do that bit. But then the next bit is the bodice, and everyone would need to do that. But it says here, fuse A and B. So if you were fuse C, you wouldn't do this bit. And then underneath for view C and D. So you just go through the instructions and you follow what it's saying for your particular version. So that's the first leaflet. And as you can see, this is more instructions on that side, and then more instructions again. So let's have a look at the indie booklet we've got here and see how it compares. One's in French and one's in English, so we don't need the French one. So we've got the name, we've got the line drawing, it says English in it, instruction booklet. Let's have a look. So we open it up and we have some information. Before you begin, for the construction of your garment to go as smoothly as possible, please read through these guidelines. It's got the cutting out layouts like it did on the commercial patterns. You've got the line drawing. This is for version A. And then for version B, because there is only 2 versions, you've got line drawings, you've got the layouts, and you've got your seam allowance. And then we get straight into the instructions. Very simple, very similar to the commercial patterns, although a lot more simple because it's got less views. This one doesn't come with cup sizes. And actually what I like here, it's very clearly laid down. I think the McCall's one is not so clearly laid out. Step 2, the waistband and the skirt. And then it says in bold, if you want to go further. Step 3, the button placket. Step 4, the collar. So if you wanted to do it in a different order to what it recommends, then you could go looking for the bit that you want to do. So I would say this is much more condensed than this. So now we're going to have a look at the actual patterns. I'm not looking forward to this bit just because it is so nicely factory folded that I don't want to mess that up, but I am not going to get it looking like that again. So rest in peace, dear pattern. This will give us a good idea about what you can expect on a pattern, on a commercial pattern, I should say. So the first thing to note is the number 9. If we take our booklet, we see number 9 is the sleeve back for version C and D. And there it also says that sleeve back C and D. And then it's got it in Spanish as well. It also says fabric cut to. So when you're cutting this out, you want to cut this out twice. You want to fold the fabric so it's on opposing sides. If you cut out 2 of these with the fabric up the right way, then one of the pieces wouldn't work. So you need to make sure you cut one piece with the fabric up and one piece with the fabric down. Lining cut to, so you want to cut this twice out of your lining as well. You've got a grain line, which is this long arrow here. You should match this line up with the grain of your fabric, and we'll talk about grain lines in more detail in one of the future videos in the series. You've got lots of lines here, and this denotes the different sizes. Well, this line to the middle with a dashed line is the smallest size, as you can see here on the notches, and as you go out you get the bigger sizes. Those circles there is where you will match up the seam allowances, and they've got the sizes next to them. These lines here denote the sizes, so the most outer one is the biggest size and the most inner one is the smallest size, but you'll notice each of the lines is a different type of line. So the outline, the outmost line is a solid line, then you've got large dash lines, then you've got a line with a large dash and a small dash, and then you've just got really large dashes, then you've got lots of small dashes. So you'll know that wherever you're looking on the pattern pieces, you'll know, like for example, a size 14 is this one, and you will look for that same line on all your pattern pieces to cut out if you were a size 14. Here we've got some notches. You've got the 5 notches all in a slightly different place depending on the size. Notches are really, really important. When we're beginners, we tend to ignore these notches, and actually I still ignore them now. But when it comes to sewing your seam up, you'll have another pattern piece that goes along this seam, and when you sew it up, you'll have these notches on this pattern piece, and you'll have notches in the same place on the opposing pattern piece, and you need to line those notches up in order to make sure the fabric hasn't stretched out, you are sewing it at a steady rate. So notches are really, really important. So going back to the middle of the pattern, we've got the name, we've got the name of the actual pattern, we've got the sizes that this pattern comes with. That's all that's on that pattern piece. Let's have a look at some other pieces. This is the bodice back, so let's have a look at this one. See here it says to cut on the fold, so if you see a line with arrows pointing to the edge, that means you cut it on the fold. So you fold your fabric in half and then lay this pattern piece up with the crease in the fabric. So you've got some notches here that we just spoke about. You've got some circles which denote where the seam allowance is. So that is a construction and detail there. It will say in the instructions exactly what it's for. We've got the number 4. So if we go down here, it says waistline. So that is where your waistline should be. So if you try this on and your waistline is not here, then you need to adapt the pattern. And if you need to lengthen it or shorten it, you would cut across this line here, and then if you want to lengthen it, put a bit of paper in and sellotape it back together, or if you need to shorten it, you would overlap it. Right, so here's the pattern pieces for the indie pattern. Now I have actually used this before, so it's not perfect. So this is printer paper, which is a lot more stable. This is Deer and Doe, pattern piece number 1. When you look in your booklet, you will see numbers on all these pattern pieces. So as you can see, it's number 1. It's in French and English. It says front bodice, cut to. So here we've got a dart. We've got all the different sizes, just like we have on the other pattern. But this pattern has darts that the other one didn't have, and you would draw your darts in depending on which size you are, because they all move along. It's got the lengthen and shorten line like the other pattern has. It's got notches. They're laid out a lot better than the commercial one, because the commercial ones tend to be overlapping of each other, and these are all laid out very singularly, so it's much easier to see and understand. Down here you've got the sizes next to each line, which is really helpful, but all the lines have different dashes on them. Here we have some directions, so it's telling you which dash line goes with which size, which is really good to know. It's telling you about the symbols, so you've got the straight grain, you've got the cut on the fold. It's saying that you've got 5/8 of a seam allowance there. And it says to choose your size, use the size chart on the pattern envelope. So it's got it in English and French. So this one folds up just as it did before. I hope you found that useful. I'm going to send you over to present day Claire. Say bye, Frederick. Say bye. Bye. So I hope you enjoyed reading that information. Do leave me a comment down below and let me know if it was useful to you. Do share it out with other people. If you like this video, do consider purchasing a coffee for me, as that helps support my channel. Subscribe if you haven't, do all the things, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.